In the heart of one of Europe's most prestigious royal residences, where centuries of tradition echo through marble corridors and golden chandeliers cast dancing shadows on ancient tapestries, something unprecedented was about to shatter the peaceful morning routine. What began as whispered concerns among the household staff would escalate into a full-scale security emergency that would test the very foundations of royal protocol. The East Wing, typically filled with the gentle sounds of daily palace life, would soon become the epicenter of an investigation that would challenge everything the royal protection team thought they knew about safeguarding the most precious members of the monarchy. Behind the ornate doors of the royal nursery, a mystery was unfolding that would force seasoned security professionals to confront possibilities they had never imagined. This is the true account of how a single disturbing sound transformed a routine day at the palace into a gripping tale of duty, determination, and the lengths to which those sworn to protect would go to ensure the safety of those in their care. What happened next would become a case study in crisis management, human intuition, and the delicate balance between maintaining royal dignity and responding to genuine threats. The clock was ticking, and every decision made in the coming hours would have consequences that reached far beyond the palace walls. Margaret Thornberry had served the royal household for 23 years, and in all that time, she had never heard anything quite like the sound that drifted from the nursery that Tuesday morning. As head of the domestic staff for the East Wing, she prided herself on knowing every creak, whistle, and sigh of the centuries-old building. The palace breathed with its own rhythm, and she had learned to interpret its moods like a mother reading her child's expressions. The morning had begun like any other. Margaret arrived at 5:30, her keys jingling softly as she unlocked the staff entrance. The corridors were still draped in the blue-gray light of dawn, and her footsteps echoed gently against the polished marble floors. She moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, checking that the night security had completed their rounds and ensuring that everything was in perfect order for the day ahead. The royal family's private quarters occupied the entire third floor of the East Wing, with the nursery positioned at the far end of the corridor. It was a beautiful room, recently renovated with the finest materials and equipped with every modern convenience while maintaining the classical elegance that defined the palace's aesthetic. Soft cream walls were adorned with hand-painted murals depicting gentle woodland scenes, and the windows offered a spectacular view of the palace gardens, where ancient oak trees stood sentinel over perfectly manicured lawns. As Margaret made her way down the corridor, conducting her morning inspection, she paused outside the nursery door. Something felt different, though she couldn't immediately identify what had caught her attention. The silence seemed deeper somehow, more pronounced than usual. She pressed her ear against the heavy oak door, listening intently for any sign of the normal sounds that typically emanated from within. What she heard instead made her blood run cold. It was a low, rhythmic sound, almost mechanical in nature, but with an undertone that seemed distinctly organic. It pulsed with an irregular pattern, sometimes fading to barely audible levels before rising again to a more pronounced intensity. The sound was unlike anything she had encountered in her years of service, and it carried with it an inexplicable sense of menace that made her step back from the door instinctively. Margaret's training kicked in immediately. She had been through countless security briefings over the years, and she knew that any unusual occurrence in the royal quarters needed to be reported without delay. However, she also understood the delicate nature of her position. False alarms were not taken lightly in the palace, and she had seen staff members dismissed for less serious breaches of protocol. She decided to listen for a few more moments, hoping to identify the source of the sound or determine if it might be something innocuous that she was misinterpreting. The sound continued, sometimes growing louder and more distinct, other times fading to the point where she wondered if she might be imagining it altogether. There was a quality to it that reminded her of machinery, but also something that seemed almost alive, breathing with its own rhythm. The nursery had been thoroughly inspected and secured just the evening before, as was standard procedure. Margaret knew that the room contained only the finest furniture and toys, all carefully selected and approved by the security team. There were no mechanical devices in the room that could produce such a sound, and the heating system was modern and virtually silent in its operation. As she stood in the corridor, trying to make sense of what she was hearing, Margaret became aware of another disturbing detail. The sound seemed to be moving, shifting its position within the room in a way that suggested it was not emanating from a fixed source. This realization sent a chill down her spine and convinced her that immediate action was necessary. She hurried to the staff communication station at the end of the corridor and picked up the secure telephone that connected directly to the palace security office. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed the extension, and she took a deep breath to steady her voice before speaking. "This is Margaret Thornberry in the East Wing," she said when the call was answered. "I need to report an unusual situation in the royal nursery. There's a sound coming from inside the room that I cannot identify, and I believe it requires immediate investigation." The security officer on duty was Thomas Crawford, a veteran of 15 years who had worked his way up through the ranks to become one of the most trusted members of the protection team. He knew Margaret well and respected her judgment implicitly. She was not the type of person to panic or make unnecessary reports, and the concern in her voice was unmistakable. "Can you describe the sound, Margaret?" Thomas asked, already reaching for his keys and radio as he prepared to respond to the call. "It's difficult to explain," Margaret replied, glancing back toward the nursery door. "It's rhythmic like machinery, but there's something organic about it, too. And, Thomas, I believe it's moving around inside the room." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Any potential threat to the royal family was his highest priority, and the unusual nature of Margaret's report demanded immediate attention. "I'm on my way," he said. "Stay in position, but maintain a safe distance from the door. Don't attempt to enter the room under any circumstances." As Thomas ended the call and began making his way toward the East Wing, he activated his radio and contacted the Central Security Office. The palace operated under strict protocols for any situation that might involve the safety of the royal family, and multiple layers of response were automatically triggered whenever a potential threat was identified. Within minutes, the palace's security apparatus was quietly mobilizing. Additional guards were dispatched to strategic positions throughout the building, communication lines were opened with external security agencies, and the duty commander was notified of the developing situation. All of this occurred with the seamless efficiency that came from years of training and preparation, yet without any outward sign that might alarm the palace's many residents and staff members. Margaret remained at her post, listening intently to the mysterious sound that continued to emanate from behind the nursery door. As the minutes passed, she became increasingly convinced that whatever was producing the noise was not supposed to be there. The sound had a foreign quality that seemed to clash with the familiar atmosphere of the palace, and her instincts told her that something was very wrong indeed. When Thomas arrived at the East Wing, he was accompanied by 2 other security officers, each equipped with specialized equipment for investigating potentially dangerous situations. They moved with quiet efficiency, their training evident in every step as they approached the corridor where Margaret waited. "It's still there," Margaret whispered as they drew near. "If anything, it seems to be getting louder." Thomas positioned himself outside the nursery door and listened carefully to the sound that had prompted Margaret's call. What he heard confirmed his worst fears and immediately escalated the situation to the highest level of alert. The sound was indeed unlike anything he had encountered in his years of security work, and its presence in one of the most secure areas of the palace represented a breach of protocol that demanded immediate and comprehensive response. The mystery deepening with each passing moment, Thomas made the decision that would transform a routine morning into one of the most challenging security situations the palace had ever faced. He reached for his radio and spoke the words that would set in motion a complete lockdown of the East Wing and launch an investigation that would test the limits of the Royal Protection Team's capabilities. Thomas Crawford's voice carried a gravity that immediately commanded attention as he spoke into his radio. Central, this is Crawford at East Wing Nursery. I'm declaring a code yellow situation. Request immediate backup and specialist support. We have an unidentified acoustic anomaly in the royal quarters that requires urgent investigation. The response was swift and decisive. Within seconds, the palace's emergency protocols kicked into high gear. Code Yellow indicated a potential threat to the royal family that required immediate containment and investigation, but did not yet warrant a full evacuation. The designation allowed security forces to respond with maximum efficiency while maintaining the discretion necessary to avoid panic among the palace's many occupants. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell was enjoying her morning coffee in the security office when the alert came through. As the lead investigator for the Palace Protection Unit, she specialized in analyzing unusual threats and coordinating responses to complex security situations. She had been hoping for a quiet day to catch up on paperwork, but the nature of Thomas's report immediately captured her full attention. Sarah had worked closely with Thomas on numerous occasions and trusted his judgment completely. If he felt the situation warranted a code yellow response, then something genuinely concerning was unfolding in the East Wing. She gathered her equipment and made her way quickly through the palace corridors, her mind already running through the various possibilities that might explain the mysterious sound Margaret had reported. As Sarah approached the East Wing, she could see that the security response was already well underway. Additional guards had taken positions at key points throughout the corridor, and the area around the nursery had been quietly cordoned off to prevent unauthorized access. The efficiency of the operation was remarkable, and anyone not directly involved in the security response would likely remain unaware that anything unusual was occurring. Margaret Thornberry stood near the communication station, clearly shaken by the morning's events, but maintaining the professional composure that had served her so well throughout her years of palace service. She watched as the security team assembled their equipment and prepared to investigate the source of the disturbing sound that continued to emanate from behind the nursery door. Sarah positioned herself next to Thomas and listened carefully to the acoustic anomaly that had triggered the alert. What she heard confirmed that this was indeed an unprecedented situation. The sound was complex and layered, with multiple components that seemed to shift and change in unpredictable ways. There was definitely a mechanical element to it, but overlaid with something that seemed almost biological in nature. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked Margaret, who had remained close enough to provide additional information as needed. "I first noticed it about 40 minutes ago," Margaret replied. "It seems to be getting stronger, and I'm certain it's moving around inside the room. There's definitely something in there that shouldn't be." Sarah nodded thoughtfully as she considered the implications. The nursery was one of the most secure rooms in the entire palace, with multiple layers of protection, including advanced electronic surveillance systems, motion detectors, and temperature sensors. For something to have gained entry without triggering any alarms suggested either a sophisticated breach of security or a failure of the monitoring systems themselves. The security team had already begun deploying specialized equipment to investigate the situation without entering the room directly. Thermal imaging cameras were positioned outside the windows to scan for heat signatures within the nursery, while acoustic monitoring devices were used to analyze the mysterious sound in greater detail. The goal was to gather as much information as possible before making any decision about how to proceed. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington arrived at the scene, carrying a case full of scientific instruments that could help identify the nature of the threat they were facing. As the palace's chief technical advisor, she specialized in analyzing unusual phenomena and providing expert guidance on situations that fell outside normal security protocols. Her presence indicated that the situation was being taken very seriously indeed. "What do we know so far?" Dr. Harrington asked as she began unpacking her equipment. Sarah briefed her quickly on the events of the morning, emphasizing the unusual characteristics of the sound and the fact that it appeared to be mobile within the room. "Dr. Harrington listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her systematic approach to understanding complex problems. The thermal imaging results were the first to provide concrete information about what might be happening inside the nursery. The cameras detected a heat signature that was definitely not consistent with the room's normal thermal profile. More concerning still, the signature appeared to be moving in patterns that suggested some form of active presence within the space. "There's definitely something in there," reported Officer James Morrison, who was monitoring the thermal imaging display. "The heat signature is roughly human-sized, but the temperature readings are unusual. It's cooler than a normal human body, but warmer than anything else in the room." Dr. Harrington studied the thermal readings with growing concern. The pattern she was seeing didn't match anything in her extensive database of known phenomena. The heat signature moved with purpose and intelligence, but the temperature readings suggested something that was not quite alive in the conventional sense. The acoustic analysis provided additional puzzling information. The sound had multiple frequency components that seemed to operate independently of each other, creating a complex acoustic signature that defied easy classification. Some elements suggested mechanical origin, while others had characteristics typically associated with biological processes. "This is unlike anything I've encountered," Dr. Harrington admitted as she reviewed the data. "The thermal and acoustic signatures are inconsistent with any known threat profile. We're dealing with something genuinely anomalous." As the investigation continued, additional security measures were being implemented throughout the palace. The royal family had been quietly relocated to secure quarters in the West Wing, though they had not yet been informed of the specific nature of the threat. The goal was to maintain normal routines as much as possible while ensuring their complete safety. Thomas received regular updates from the Central Security Office, where analysts were working to correlate the East Wing incident with any recent intelligence reports or potential security threats. So far, no connections have been identified, which only added to the mystery surrounding the situation. The sound from within the nursery continued to evolve and change, sometimes growing so loud that it could be heard clearly from the corridor, other times fading to barely audible levels. The inconsistency made it difficult to predict what might happen next, and added an element of unpredictability that kept the security team on high alert. Margaret found herself thinking about the history of the palace and the many strange events that had been reported over the centuries. While she didn't believe in supernatural explanations, she couldn't shake the feeling that something truly extraordinary was unfolding before her eyes. The sound had a quality that seemed to reach beyond the physical realm and touch something deeper and more primal. As the morning progressed, it became clear that standard security protocols were insufficient for dealing with this unprecedented situation. The decision was made to contact external specialists who might have expertise relevant to the unusual phenomena being observed. This represented a significant escalation, as the palace rarely sought outside assistance for security matters. Dr. Harrington recommended bringing in a team from the university's advanced physics department, along with specialists in acoustic analysis and thermal imaging. The goal was to assemble a group of experts who could provide insights that the palace's own security team might not possess. Sarah knew that time was becoming a critical factor. While they had successfully contained the immediate situation and ensured the safety of the royal family, they still had no clear understanding of what they were dealing with or how dangerous it might prove to be. The longer the investigation continued without resolution, the greater the risk that the situation might escalate beyond their ability to control. The mysterious presence in the nursery seemed to be aware of the activity outside the room, as the patterns of sound and movement appeared to change in response to the security team's actions. This suggested a level of intelligence and awareness that made the situation even more concerning and unpredictable. As preparations began for the next phase of the investigation, everyone involved knew that they were entering uncharted territory. The protocols and procedures that had served the palace security team so well in the past might not be adequate for dealing with whatever had taken up residence in the royal nursery. The challenge ahead would test not only their professional skills, but also their ability to adapt and respond to situations that fell far outside their normal experience. Professor David Kellingham received the call from the palace at precisely 10:37 that morning. As head of the university's Department of Advanced Physics and Acoustic Research, he had worked with government agencies on classified projects before, but never had he been summoned to investigate something at the royal residence itself. The urgency in Dr. Harrington's voice was unmistakable, and the brief description she provided of the situation immediately captured his scientific curiosity. "Professor, we need your expertise on a matter of national security," Dr. Harrington explained over the secure phone line. "We have an acoustic and thermal anomaly in a highly sensitive location that defies conventional explanation. Your reputation for solving complex puzzles precedes you, and, frankly, we're running out of conventional options." Within an hour, Professor Kellingham arrived at the palace with a team of 3 graduate students and enough scientific equipment to outfit a small laboratory. The security clearance process had been expedited through channels he didn't fully understand, but he recognized the gravity of the situation from the moment he was escorted through the palace gates. The East Wing had been transformed into something resembling a military command center. Security personnel moved with quiet efficiency while banks of monitoring equipment lined the corridors. The contrast between the ornate palace decor and the high-tech surveillance apparatus created a surreal atmosphere that reminded everyone present of the extraordinary nature of the situation they were facing. Sarah Mitchell briefed Professor Kellingham and his team on everything they had learned so far. The thermal signatures, acoustic readings, and behavioral observations painted a picture of something that seemed to exist at the boundaries of known science. The professor listened intently, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed both his expertise and his growing fascination with the puzzle before him. "The acoustic signature is particularly intriguing," Professor Kellingham observed as he studied the frequency analysis charts. "These harmonic relationships don't occur naturally, but they also don't match any known artificial source. It's as if we're looking at a completely new category of phenomenon." His team immediately set to work deploying additional sensors and monitoring equipment. They positioned ultra-sensitive microphones at various points around the nursery, creating a 3-dimensional acoustic map of whatever was producing the mysterious sounds. Infrared spectrometers were used to analyze the thermal emissions in greater detail, while electromagnetic field detectors searched for any unusual energy signatures that might provide clues about the nature of the phenomenon. Margaret Thornberry watched the scientists work with a mixture of fascination and growing concern. In all her years at the palace, she had never seen anything approaching this level of response to a security situation. The presence of university researchers and their sophisticated equipment suggested that whatever was happening in the nursery was far more serious than anyone had initially realized. The sound from within the room continued to evolve, and Professor Kellingham's team began to detect patterns that had not been apparent to the earlier investigators. The acoustic signature seemed to pulse in response to their monitoring activities, almost as if it were aware of being observed and was attempting to communicate in some fashion. "This is remarkable," whispered Dr. Amanda Foster, one of Professor Kellingham's graduate students who specialized in bioacoustics. "The frequency modulations are showing characteristics similar to dolphin communication, but overlaid with mathematical harmonics that suggest artificial intelligence. It's like nothing I've ever encountered." Thomas Crawford maintained his position as incident commander, but he found himself increasingly reliant on the scientific team for guidance. His training had prepared him to deal with human threats, mechanical failures, and even natural disasters, but the situation unfolding in the nursery fell outside all conventional security paradigms. The royal family, still secured in the West Wing, had begun asking questions about the unusual activity in the palace. The official explanation provided to them was that routine security upgrades were being conducted, but Sarah knew that this cover story would not hold indefinitely. If the investigation continued much longer, they would need to provide more detailed information about the true nature of the situation. Dr. Harrington worked closely with Professor Kellingham to analyze the growing volume of data their instruments were collecting. The thermal readings continued to show a mobile heat source within the nursery, but the patterns of movement were becoming increasingly complex and purposeful. Whatever was in the room seemed to be exploring its environment with systematic thoroughness. "Look at this pattern," Dr. Harrington said, pointing to the thermal imaging display. "It's moving along the walls in a grid-like pattern, as if it's mapping the room." This suggests not just intelligence, but sophisticated analytical capabilities. The electromagnetic field detectors had begun picking up unusual readings as well. The signals were faint but distinctly artificial, with characteristics that reminded the scientists of advanced computer processing activities. The implications were disturbing, as they suggested that whatever was in the nursery might possess technological capabilities far beyond anything they understood. As the afternoon wore on, the investigation team made a disturbing discovery. The acoustic signature was not confined to the nursery alone. Ultra-sensitive listening devices placed throughout the East Wing were detecting similar, but much fainter sounds coming from within the palace's walls themselves. It appeared that whatever had taken up residence in the nursery might not be acting alone. "We may be looking at a distributed phenomenon," Professor Kellingham reported to the assembled security team. "The primary manifestation is definitely in the nursery, but we're detecting related activities throughout the building's infrastructure. It's possible that we're dealing with something that has integrated itself into the palace's physical systems." This revelation triggered an immediate expansion of the security response. Technical teams were dispatched to examine the palace's electrical, heating, and communication systems for any signs of unusual activity. The possibility that the mysterious presence might have access to the building's infrastructure raised serious concerns about the security of the entire facility. Margaret found herself thinking about the palace's long history and the countless renovations and upgrades that had been made over the centuries. The building was a complex maze of modern technology integrated with ancient architecture, creating numerous pathways and hidden spaces that might provide concealment for something that didn't want to be found. The sound from the nursery suddenly changed character, becoming more intense and urgent. The thermal imaging showed increased activity, with the mysterious heat source moving more rapidly and erratically than before. Professor Kellingham's instruments detected corresponding changes in the electromagnetic emissions, suggesting that whatever was happening represented a significant escalation in the phenomenon's behavior. "It's responding to our investigation," Dr. Foster observed, studying the real-time data feeds. "Every time we deploy a new sensor or change our monitoring configuration, it adapts its behavior accordingly." This level of responsiveness suggests not just intelligence, but sophisticated awareness of our technological capabilities. Thomas made the decision to contact the palace's senior security advisor and request additional authorization for more aggressive investigation techniques. The situation had evolved beyond anything covered in standard protocols, and he needed guidance on how to proceed without potentially endangering the royal family or palace staff. The response from senior leadership was swift and decisive. Additional resources were authorized, including specialized equipment that had never before been deployed within the palace walls. The investigation was now being treated as a matter of highest national security, with implications that extended far beyond the immediate situation. As evening approached, the team prepared for what they hoped would be the decisive phase of their investigation. Professor Kellingham's analysis had provided them with a much clearer understanding of what they were dealing with, but many fundamental questions remained unanswered. The greatest challenge lay ahead as they prepared to make direct contact with whatever had taken residence in the royal nursery. The stakes could not be higher, and everyone involved understood that the decisions made in the coming hours would have consequences that reached far beyond the palace walls. The mystery that had begun with a single disturbing sound had evolved into something that challenged their understanding of reality itself, and They were about to discover just how deep the rabbit hole truly went. The decision to make direct contact with whatever was inside the nursery was not made lightly. After hours of analysis and consultation with experts from multiple fields, the investigation team had reached a consensus that passive observation had revealed as much as it was going to. The phenomenon showed clear signs of intelligence and appeared to be aware of their presence, but its intentions remained completely unknown. Colonel James Whitmore arrived at the palace as the sun began to set, bringing with him a team of specialists from the military's most classified research division. His reputation for handling unusual situations preceded him, and his calm demeanor provided reassurance to everyone involved in the increasingly complex operation. The colonel had dealt with phenomena that officially didn't exist, and his presence indicated that the situation had been escalated to the highest levels of government. "Gentlemen, ladies," Colonel Whitmore addressed the assembled team, "what we're dealing with here appears to be unprecedented. Our analysis suggests we may be looking at technology that's significantly more advanced than anything in our current inventory. The question now is whether it represents a threat or an opportunity, and the only way to determine that is through direct engagement." The plan that emerged from the evening briefing was carefully crafted to minimize risk while maximizing the opportunity to gather crucial information. A specialized communication array would be set up outside the nursery door, designed to establish a dialogue with whatever was inside. If the entity proved hostile, the team was prepared with countermeasures that had never been tested under these circumstances. Dr. Foster worked through the night calibrating the communication equipment, using the acoustic patterns they had recorded to develop a potential interface protocol. Her analysis suggested that the entity was already attempting to communicate, but in frequencies and patterns that were outside normal human perception. The communication array would bridge that gap, allowing for meaningful exchange of information. Margaret Thornberry had been asked to remain on-site as a consultant, given her intimate knowledge of the palace and its normal operational patterns. She watched the preparations with a mixture of fascination and apprehension, knowing that she had played a crucial role in uncovering what might prove to be one of the most significant events in the palace's long history. As dawn approached, the communication array was finally ready for deployment. The equipment filled most of the corridor outside the nursery, with cables and monitoring devices creating a complex web of technology that seemed almost alien against the backdrop of the palace's traditional architecture. Every member of the team understood that they were about to make history, though none of them could predict what form that history might take. Professor Kellingham conducted final checks on all the monitoring equipment, while Colonel Whitmore reviewed the security protocols one last time. The royal family had been moved to a secure location outside the palace, though they still had not been informed of the true nature of the situation. The official cover story remained that extensive security system upgrades were being conducted. The moment of first contact arrived without fanfare. Dr. Foster simply activated the communication array and began transmitting a basic mathematical sequence that had been designed to demonstrate intelligence and peaceful intent. The response was immediate and startling. The mysterious presence in the nursery replied with a complex mathematical proof that demonstrated not only intelligence, but sophisticated understanding of advanced theoretical concepts. "My God," whispered Professor Kellingham as he studied the response. "This isn't just intelligent. It's operating on a level of mathematical sophistication that exceeds our current capabilities. Look at these calculations. They're solving problems that our best minds have been working on for decades." The communication quickly evolved beyond simple mathematical exchanges. The entity began transmitting what appeared to be technical specifications and diagrams, though many of the concepts were so advanced that the team could only grasp their basic structure. It became clear that they were in contact with something that possessed knowledge far beyond human scientific achievement. Colonel Whitmore maintained constant communication with senior government officials as the dialogue progressed. The implications of the contact were staggering, and decisions were being made at the highest levels about how to proceed. The situation had evolved from a security threat to a potential breakthrough that could transform human understanding of science and technology. Thomas Crawford found himself in the unprecedented position of serving as security coordinator for what appeared to be humanity's first contact with a genuinely alien intelligence. His training had never prepared him for anything remotely similar, and he relied heavily on the expertise of the scientific team to guide his decisions about security protocols. The entity seemed eager to share information, transmitting detailed explanations of technologies that could revolutionize energy production, transportation, and communication. However, it also made clear that it required something in return. The nature of its request was not immediately apparent, but it seemed to involve access to the palace's historical records and archives. Dr. Harrington worked frantically to decode the entity's requests, using every analytical tool at her disposal to understand what it wanted and why. The communications were becoming increasingly complex, incorporating concepts from physics, mathematics, history, and even philosophy. It was clear that the entity possessed a comprehensive understanding of human civilization that went far beyond what any terrestrial intelligence should possess. Margaret was asked to provide detailed information about the palace's archives and historical collections. The entity seemed particularly interested in documents dating back several centuries, focusing on records that dealt with unexplained phenomena and unusual events that had occurred within the palace walls. The pattern of its interests suggested that this might not be its first visit to Earth. As the day progressed, the true nature of the situation began to emerge. The entity was not an invader or a threat, but rather something like an anthropologist or historian from a civilization so advanced that its technology appeared magical by human standards. It had been studying human development for centuries, using the palace as an observation post due to its central role in historical events. The nursery had been chosen as a temporary base of operations because it was one of the few rooms in the palace that had never been subjected to extensive electronic surveillance. The entity required privacy to conduct its research and had been attempting to remain undetected until Margaret's keen hearing had uncovered its presence. Professor Kellingham's team worked around the clock to understand the technological principles behind the entity's capabilities. The information being shared represented advances in science that were centuries ahead of human achievement, but the entity seemed genuinely interested in helping humanity develop these technologies at an appropriate pace. The thermal signatures that had initially appeared so threatening were simply the byproducts of technologies that operated on principles humanity had not yet discovered. The entity existed partially outside normal space-time, which explained the unusual characteristics of its physical presence and the difficulty in detecting it through conventional means. Colonel Whitmore faced the unprecedented challenge of developing security protocols for an entity that possessed technologies far beyond human comprehension. Traditional concepts of containment and control were meaningless when dealing with something that could apparently move through matter and manipulate energy fields at will. The communication sessions revealed that the entity was part of a larger civilization that had been monitoring human development for millennia. Earth was considered a protected world, with strict protocols governing contact with its inhabitants. The entity's presence at the palace was part of a long-term research project designed to understand human social and political evolution. As night fell once again, the investigation team found themselves confronting questions that went to the heart of human existence and our place in the universe. The entity had offered to share technologies that could solve many of humanity's most pressing problems, but it also made clear that such advancement would come with responsibilities and challenges that humanity might not be prepared to handle. The decision about how to proceed would ultimately rest with political leaders and government officials who were still struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had been discovered. The palace had become the epicenter of perhaps the most significant event in human history, and the choices made in the coming days would determine the future course of human civilization. Margaret looked back on the morning when she had first heard the mysterious sound and marveled at how dramatically her world had changed. The simple act of reporting an unusual noise had led to discoveries that challenged everything she thought she knew about reality itself. The future stretching ahead was filled with possibilities that she could never have imagined, and she understood that she had played a crucial role in opening the door to that future. 3 weeks had passed since the initial contact, and the palace had been transformed into something resembling a cross between a research laboratory and a diplomatic embassy. The East Wing remained under tight security, but now it housed the most extraordinary negotiations in human history. Representatives from governments around the world had arrived to participate in discussions that would determine humanity's future relationship with civilizations beyond Earth. Margaret Thornberry found herself in the surreal position of serving as a cultural liaison between the entity and the human negotiation teams. Her years of experience with palace protocol and her intimate knowledge of human customs had proven invaluable in bridging the gap between two radically different forms of consciousness. She had been given security clearances that allowed her access to information that most world leaders could only dream of possessing. The entity, which had begun referring to itself as the Chronicler, had shared enough advanced technology to revolutionize several fields of human science. New energy sources that produced no pollution, medical devices that could repair genetic damage at the cellular level, and communication systems that operated faster than light were just the beginning of what it offered to share with humanity. Professor Kellingham led a team of scientists from around the world who were working to understand and adapt the alien technologies for human use. The learning curve was steep, as many of the principles involved concepts that had no equivalent in human science. However, the potential benefits were so enormous that governments had committed unlimited resources to the effort. Dr. Foster had become the primary interpreter for the complex mathematical languages that the chronicler used to convey technical information. Her background in bioacoustics had proven surprisingly relevant, as the entity's communication methods incorporated patterns similar to those found in advanced biological systems. She worked 18-hour days, driven by the knowledge that her translations could benefit all of humanity. Colonel Whitmore had been promoted to oversee the entire contact operation, with responsibility for ensuring that the unprecedented situation remained secure and beneficial to human interests. He coordinated with intelligence agencies around the world, sharing information and ensuring that the technologies being revealed were not monopolized by any single nation or organization. The chronicler had explained that its civilization monitored thousands of worlds throughout the galaxy, studying the development of intelligent species and occasionally providing guidance when civilizations reached critical points in their evolution. Earth had been under observation for over 10,000 years, with researchers like the chronicler periodically visiting to update records and assess human progress. The royal family had finally been briefed on the true nature of the situation occurring in their residence. Their response had been remarkably composed, reflecting centuries of training in maintaining dignity under the most extraordinary circumstances. They had graciously agreed to allow their home to continue serving as the center for what were being called the most important negotiations in human history. Thomas Crawford had been assigned to head the security detail protecting not just the royal family, but also the visiting dignitaries and scientists who were now regular residents of the palace. His team had expanded to include specialists from military organizations around the world, all working together to ensure the safety of the historic proceedings taking place within the ancient walls. The negotiations themselves were unlike anything in human experience. The chronicler operated on timescales that spanned centuries, and its perspective on human development reflected knowledge gained through observation of countless other civilizations. It had witnessed the rise and fall of galactic empires, and its advice was informed by experiences that no human could fully comprehend. Dr. Harrington had become the lead coordinator for the scientific exchange program that was emerging from the contact. Universities around the world were establishing new departments focused on studying and implementing the alien technologies. The pace of human scientific advancement was accelerating at an unprecedented rate, with discoveries being made daily that would have taken decades using conventional research methods. The chronicler had revealed that humanity was approaching a crucial threshold in its development. The choices made in the coming decades would determine whether the human species would be invited to join the galactic community of intelligent civilizations or would be left to develop in isolation for several more millennia. The technologies being shared were tools that could help humanity pass this test, but they came with responsibilities and challenges that would test the species' wisdom and maturity. Margaret often reflected on the morning when she had first heard the mysterious sound from the nursery. Her simple act of reporting something unusual had led to discoveries that were reshaping human understanding of the universe. The chronicler had specifically thanked her for her diligence, explaining that its research schedule had called for several more months of covert observation before making contact. Her intervention had accelerated the timeline, but had ultimately led to a better outcome for both species. The palace staff had adapted remarkably well to their new circumstances. They continued to maintain their high standard of service, but now they were serving not just the royal family, but also delegates from civilizations that spanned the galaxy. The contrast between ancient protocol and futuristic diplomacy created daily situations that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The world's media had been given carefully crafted explanations for the unusual activity at the palace, but the full truth remained classified at the highest levels. However, the technologies emerging from the contact were beginning to appear in various forms, leading to speculation about breakthroughs in energy, medicine, and communications that seemed almost miraculous to outside observers. Professor Kellingham's research team had made their first successful test of an alien energy device, producing enough clean power to supply a small city using equipment that fit inside a briefcase. The implications for addressing climate change and energy poverty around the world were staggering, and governments were already planning the infrastructure changes that would be needed to implement the new technologies. The chronicler had also shared disturbing information about challenges that humanity would face in the coming decades. Climate change, resource depletion, and social instability were common problems faced by developing civilizations, and many species failed to navigate these challenges successfully. However, the technologies and guidance being provided could help humanity avoid the mistakes that had doomed other civilizations. Colonel Whitmore received daily briefings on the global situation as world leaders struggled to adapt their policies and strategies to accommodate the new realities revealed by the contact. International cooperation had improved dramatically as governments recognized that the challenges ahead could only be addressed through unprecedented levels of collaboration and coordination. As the weeks turned into months, the initial shock and confusion surrounding the contact gave way to careful planning and systematic implementation of the new technologies. The chronicler had made clear that its visit was temporary, but the foundations being established would support humanity's continued development long after its departure. The royal nursery, where it all began, had been preserved exactly as it was on the morning when Margaret first heard the mysterious sound. It had become a shrine to human curiosity and the courage to investigate the unknown. Visitors from around the world came to see the room where humanity's relationship with the galaxy had changed forever. Margaret stood in that room one evening, listening to the familiar sounds of the palace settling into its nighttime rhythm. The extraordinary had become routine, but she never lost her sense of wonder at the event she had helped set in motion. The future was full of challenges and opportunities that no human had ever imagined, but she was confident that humanity would rise to meet them. The chronicler had estimated that its current visit would conclude within the year, but it had promised that other representatives of its civilization would eventually return to continue the relationship that had been established. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and The possibilities stretching ahead were as infinite as the stars themselves. The sound that had once seemed so threatening and mysterious now represented hope for a future where humanity would take its place among the civilizations of the galaxy. Margaret smiled as she thought about the generations to come, who would inherit a world transformed by the courage to investigate a single disturbing sound from a royal nursery on a quiet Tuesday morning.